So they have how many men there? 98,000. And they can't supply them. Well, that's gonna suck. Huh? No, they have plenty of food. Well, how much food? Gee, yeah, the war might be over by then. Hey, good for them, I guess, huh? Huh? Yeah, they still do get bombed every day. Yeah, true. Okay, see ya. February 18th, 1944. For 1,415 years, it has stood since being founded by Saint Benedict in the year 529. It is the Abbey at Monte Cassino, the very first house of the Benedictine order. I say has stood, for this week, the Allies blew it up. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviet drive continued pushing into former Polish territory, reaching Rovno and Lutsk. In the north, their advance also continued. Further south, they still had tens of thousands of the enemy trapped in the Korsun Pocket. And even further south, they took the major prize of Nikopol. In Italy, there was a lull in fighting as both sides geared up for new attacks. But over in the South Seas, the aerial campaign to neutralize Rabaul continued, as it does every week. There is plenty of news from that part of the world this week, actually. On the 12th, on New Britain, U.S. Marines take Gorisy, 40 kilometers east of Cape Gloucester. The Allies also land on Rook Island in the Dampier Strait. But big Pacific news comes the 16th, as U.S. Task Group 58.4 hits Eniwetok Atoll. The Japanese airfield on Engebe is put almost totally out of action by the bombardment. On the 17th comes the first American landings on Eniwetok. Small groups are landed on islets near Engebe with artillery to support future operations. This is Operation Catchpole and is to provide an airfield and harbor to support attacks on the Marianas. 3 battleships and 3 escort carriers are support. The Japanese have around 3,400 men on these islands total. Today, the 18th, American forces land on Engebe and fight off all counterattacks. Also this week, well, yesterday and today, is Operation Hailstone, which is a series of massive American attacks on the Japanese fleet at Truk. This is by 9 carriers and 6 battleships with cruisers, destroyers, subs, and 560 planes. 1,250 sorties fly over 2 days against the fleet and merchant shipping there. The planes sink a light cruiser, a destroyer, and 140,000 tons of shipping. And battleships Iowa and New Jersey sink another light cruiser and 2 destroyers. For the loss of 30 American planes, the Japanese lose over 250 and over 4,500 men killed versus 40 for the Americans. The loss of the Japanese pilots might be the toughest blow since they are irreplaceable at this point. 17,000 tons of fuel destroyed has to sting as well. The thing is, though Truk, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, was the Japanese combined fleet's main base, it is not so anymore. Fleet Commander Mineichi Koga left a few days ago when U.S. Third Fleet was reported in the general area. American advances in the Solomons, New Guinea, New Britain, the Gilberts, and now the Marshalls have made Truk unsustainable. So all the major warships, the carriers, the battleships, the heavy cruisers, they've been relocated. Palau is to be the new forward base, and Truk is no longer such a big deal. The garrison there is pretty much isolated and left to itself, which is likely going to be a whole lot of fun for them. It's the same at Rabaul, where the Japanese have 98,000 men who cannot now expect more supplies. But guess what? They actually have enough food and supplies to last for many, many months, well over a year. The Allied bombing campaign has not reduced the ground forces' fighting capacity. It's just rendered them totally irrelevant. What can they do without air or sea power? Soon, the Allies will have such aerial supremacy there that they will even begin sending the bombing raids unescorted, since there won't be enemy planes to shoot them down. Taking the Marshalls has wrecked Japan's outer defense perimeter and opened up the way for the 1,600-kilometer advance to the Marianas. Truk has been neutralized, and the outer Japanese bases basically cut off. This is a big deal. Something that many people in many parts of the world think is also a big deal, especially religious Catholics, happens this week in Italy. Okay, on the 12th, the New Zealand Corps replaces the US 2nd Corps opposite Monte Cassino, right? I've mentioned this coming. Well, on the 15th, at Commander Bernard Freiberg's request, the monastery is heavily bombed, wrecking the historic buildings. As we've seen, no actual enemy fire has come from the monastery, just from nearby. Leaflets are dropped in advance, addressed to Italian friends, warning that the monastery is to soon be a target. Freiberg and Tucker, of 4th Indian Division, decide that they must bomb. Freiberg's responsibility is heightened by his awareness that he leads a large proportion of New Zealand's military manpower. In fact, the Germans have been scrupulous not to enter the monastery. Once the abbey has been bombed, however, the Germans move in and find that the ruins and the cellars provide an excellent position, better than the undamaged buildings would have been. Over 4 hours, 400 tons of bombs hit the monastery and kill as many as 250 refugees who are in the upper levels. But sending the bombers in already the 15th instead of the 16th, as originally planned, means that the follow-up attacks by Maori, Gurkha, and Indian troops up the slopes or against the town with bayonets have not been really prepared, and so they achieve little. But there's way more to all this, okay? The Allies had no intelligence about the actual construction of the monastery. So Tucker went prowling through the bookstores in Naples until he found a book from 1879 that detailed the dimensions and the thickness of the walls. He argued to Freiberg that it didn't matter whether the Germans are or are not in the monastery. They would still occupy it during the battle anyhow. The Air Force commanders, they're all for the operation too, but 5th Army Commander Mark Clark is against it. Not just because it would be both culturally and religiously shameful to destroy it, but as they've seen time and time again in Salerno, in Ortona, a wrecked town and buildings with rubble can offer better protection than intact ones. And of course, the Germans might not be in the building now, but a lot of refugees are. But General Alexander, who knew the psychological hold the monastery had on Allied soldiers, decided in favor of the bombing. It seemed not only sensible, but obligatory to give the attacking troops all the support that could be mustered. Was the destruction of the monastery a military necessity? Was it morally wrong to destroy it? Alexander later wrote. The answer to the first question is yes. It was necessary more for the effect it would have on the morale of the attackers than for purely material reasons. The answer to the second question is this. When soldiers are fighting for a just cause and are prepared to suffer death and mutilation in the process, bricks and mortar, no matter how venerable, cannot be allowed to weigh against human lives. They rush this for a reason too. They know the Germans are about to counterattack at Anzio, so this attack has to get moving as soon as possible to tie down any possible reinforcements. 4th Indian has to get ready for the ground assault, and the refugees in the monastery have to be warned, of course. Well, the airmen get to decide the timing, since they're the ones who need a clear weather forecast. They plan for the 16th, but the skies clear up, so they move it up a day to the 15th. But a bunch of units on the ground manage to not be informed of this. And on the 14th, yes, they drop the leaflets saying to leave the monastery at once. But the monks have to parley with the Germans to get out. And they have to prepare the refugees, many of whom are very old and very sick. They plan to leave at 5 a.m. the 16th. So when the attack comes at 9:45 a.m. the 15th, they are still in the building. The bombardment, heavy as it is, does not destroy the lower part of the building. The 3-meter thick walls are not even breached. The 4th Indian is not only not prepared for their follow-up attack, not having nearly enough grenades and mortars, they are furious that it was moved up a day. In fact, only 15 minutes before the bombers appear on the scene is when some frontline troops learn they moved the day up. And for many, it's too late to pull back and find better cover, so 24 or so Indian troops are injured in the bombardment. They have good reason to be angry. The Indians attack again the next couple of days without success, and in the town, the Maori take the railway station, but they can't hold on to it. Operation Avenger, that's what this whole thing is called. Petered out after nearly 600 4th Indian casualties and more than 200 New Zealanders killed or wounded. Understrength, uncoordinated, and unimaginative, obliterating the abbey brought no military advantage of any kind, the British official history concluded, and, as the U.S. Army's own history added, gained nothing but destruction, indignation, sorrow, and regret. And the next day, the 16th, the German attacks begin at Anzio. 5 divisions attack the U.S. 45th and British 56th divisions with Luftwaffe support. By now, the Germans outnumber the Allies here 125,000 to 100,000 or so. Thing is, the German infantry has panzers as backup, right? But they run into a familiar problem: mud. They can only operate here on the main roads, and that makes them big targets for Allied artillery. There's also another morale downer for the Germans: the failure of an elite regiment. This is the Berlin-Spandau Infantry Lehr, whom Hitler has personally sent to lead Mackenson's offensive. The Infantry Lehr was a special demonstration unit that had been used in Germany to instruct troops in training. Its men were politically reliable and tough in appearance, but they had one major shortcoming: they had never been in a fight. Against his better judgment, Mackensen obeyed Hitler's order and put them in the forefront. The veterans of the U.S. 45th Division cut them to bits. The Lehr regiment broke and ran, demoralizing other troops who were advancing behind them. Still, on the 17th, the Germans nearly break through the Americans with heavy losses on both sides. Today, the 18th, the Germans send in 26th Panzer and 29th Panzer Grenadier divisions. This is their main armor reserve. They're trying to cut the Anzio-Campoleone road, but Allied artillery stops them. Both smiling Albert Kesselring and Eberhard von Mackensen, commanding the Germans, realized that though they may be able to contain the Allied beachhead, they cannot destroy it. In Allied command at Anzio is a change this week, actually. Lucian Truscott is appointed as John Lucas's deputy 6th Corps commander. Lucas writes in his diary, "I think this means my relief, and that Truscott gets the Corps. I hope I am not to be relieved. I have done my best, I've carried out my orders, and my conscience is clear." Something else to mention about the war in Italy this week, something that happens at Caira, near Cassino, described by Rick Atkinson in The Day of Battle. There is a ceasefire the 14th to collect the dead. A German courier under a white flag brings the proposal, and the truce lasts until noon. Hundreds of corpses are carried away by both sides, or delivered to each other's side. The troops swap stories and cigarettes with their enemy counterparts. Talk about the Italian girls. The Germans tell the Americans that Rome is nice, but Berlin is better. When rifle fire begins up at Monte Cassino, they shake hands and go back to their sides with the last loads of the dead. There are fresh loads of the dead being created this week in the fighting in the Soviet Union. It's full crisis mode this week for the Germans trapped in the Korsun Pocket. From the 12th, 4 German panzer divisions fight their way into 6th Tank Army, and the encircled forces try to fight their way out to the relief force. Soviet 1st and 2nd Ukrainian Front commanders Nikolai Vatutin and Ivan Konyev want to destroy them. Konyev got control of 27th Army, while 5th Air Army was assigned to support Vatutin's operations on the outer encirclement, and 2nd Air Army committed to prevent any German supply or support. Konyev finally got his airstrike. The rain of incendiaries fell on Shandarovka, lighting up the target for the Russian guns, which rapidly ranged on the village from their positions not more than 5,000 yards away. With all shelter being destroyed around them, Wilhelm Stemmermann's force makes a final breakout attempt beginning at 2 a.m. the 17th. They destroy their big guns and the vehicles. They even, according to Soviet accounts, kill the wounded. They cannot bring them along. Across the path, of the marching Germans lay two Soviet armies, with lines of infantry, tanks, and Cossack cavalrymen, the artillery massed in the woods. Only when the German columns emerged from the ravines into a stretch of open country, with the German troops whooping their delight at having escaped, did the waiting Russians attack. As Eriksson goes on to describe, Soviet tanks plow over the column. Cossacks cut off the hands of those who raised them in surrender. It is a human hunt that goes on for hours. Konev is not so interested in prisoners. This battle cost as many as 20,000 dead for the Axis, though that likely is a bunch smaller. For the whole Korsun Pocket affair, actually, numbers vary considerably among sources. The numbers I think most likely are of 56,000 originally trapped, some 35,000 do break free, but that's still the loss of at least 20,000 men. Stemmerman is killed as well. However, none of the 6 divisions that managed to break out are even remotely fit for any operations and will not be for some time, leaving Army Group South Commander Erich von Manstein even more short-handed than before. The Soviets are also hitting Army Group North hard this week. On the 12th, Soviet 67th Army takes Luga, and the Axis fall back towards Pskov, holding on to the Luga-Pskov Railway. Stavka has told Soviet Leningrad Front Commander Leonid Govorov that Narva has to fall by the 17th, and Second Shock Army has already reached the Narva River both north and south of it, but they are too exhausted to take the city itself. Actually, after taking Luga, Stavka disbands the Volkhov front. 59th, 8th, and 54th Armies, and the reserve divisions, go to Govorov's command, and First Shock goes back to Markian Popov's 2nd Baltic Front. Stavka issues orders the 17th for 2nd Baltic to aim at Ostrov. The danger to 16th Army was growing, from Govorov in the north and Popov in the southeast, 2 outflanking moves which the German command could no longer ignore. The Germans begin to pull back from Staraya Russa, though it takes a couple days before First Shock notices this. Today, Soviet forces enter the town. And with that, I will end the week. No, actually there is one side note I want to talk about first. Operation Fortitude. This is a deception in advance of the Allied invasion of Normandy, which is to go off later this spring. The thinking here has been that, of course, the Germans are going to notice a big troop buildup in southern England, but where is it going to attack? So they want the Germans to think the invasion is going to hit at Pas de Calais, and to hit later on than it actually will, in late June or even in July. David Strangeways, head of R Force, another deception force for France, based on his work with A-Force, which used radio nets and armored decoys in North Africa, has some big issue with the original Fortitude plans. He feels that, sure, this plan covers the Allied intentions, but it makes no realistic threat to Pas de Calais, to which the Axis would feel they have to respond. And maybe the enemy would be already set to fight an invasion by June, which, when it came, would give them weeks to fight it before heading over to defend Calais against the fake invasion. So the deception plan has been changed. After the real invasion begins, they would suggest to the enemy that assault divisions remain in England to hit Calais once the Normandy beachhead has drawn off its defenses. Allied command approves this the 18th, and that same day, Winston Churchill changes the operation's name to Fortitude. It had been called Messpot before. Strangeways is still unimpressed, and it looks like there might be some sort of power struggle over the operation in the near future. And now it really is the end of the week, with the Korsun Pocket eliminated. The Soviets still a big threat in the north, a bunch of action in the Central Pacific, a bunch of destruction at Truk, and a smaller act of destruction in Italy at Monte Cassino. Even before the smoke is cleared there, PR efforts to justify the bombing are underway. The OSS is under pressure for evidence that German troops had occupied the Abbey, of which there is none. Henry Wilson, who is Supreme Commander of the Mediterranean Theater, writes, "Suggest we should confine our statement to the fact that military authorities on the spot have irrefutable evidence that the Cassino Abbey was part of the main German defense line," which is a lie. I found that in Rick Atkinson's The Day of Battle. And Atkinson actually has more to say on the subject. Today, the 18th, Abbot Diamare is interviewed in front of movie cameras and for German radio. He says, everything was done on the part of the German armed forces in order to give the opponent no military ground for attacking the monastery. We simply did not believe the English and Americans would attack the abbey. We laid out white clothes in order to say to them, do nothing to us. They have destroyed the monastery and killed hundreds of innocent people. The ruined abbey quickly becomes a symbol for the Italian War of Attrition. Fifth Army's newest 11-kilometer advance has cost 16,000 casualties. And I will end today with this, a direct quote from Atkinson. Yet, as shellfire and the odd bombing sortie continued to carve away Cassino's crest, those entrenched in the Rapido Flats could not help but feel that once again something had been lost in this dark epoch of loss. Of course, the deeper regret extended beyond ecclesiastical landmarks. War was whittling it all away. Civility and moderation, youth and innocence, mountains and men. Speaking of the Catholic religion, we did a series on the Vatican during World War II, and you can check that out right here soon. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is William N. Conkey. It is the Army that finances all of these episodes and that mini-series. So to get more of this, join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the Army's newest commissioned officers. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.